in Voices and Views. With Lawrence A. Strick, I'm Peter B. Collins. In our second segment, in just a few minutes, we'll talk with San Rafael City Councilman Greg Brockbank, who is now running for mayor. Larry?
First, Peter, I'm pleased to have Jared Huffman back. He was our first guest on our first show. He's announced he will run for Congress if our current Congresswoman retires as expected. Everyone knows Jared was a volleyball star and a lawyer, environmental lawyer, and a trial lawyer. Jared, we're here now in mid-June. Today, actually, the governor vetoed a budget that was passed on party line, Democratic budget. We don't really know what's going to happen. How do you see the process moving forward, and what is the roadmap you think we're going to get to, if at all, on a budget?
Well, Larry, I am still reeling a little bit because I was taken by surprise. I think most of my Democratic colleagues were taken by surprise when the governor vetoed our budget. And up until now, I have felt that we were very much in sync with the governor on this budget strategy. What happened today, frankly, puts us in uncharted territory. And the reason for that is I would love to follow the governor to a better budget. I was very candid in acknowledging this was not a great budget. Too many gimmicks, too much likelihood that we will face more deficits in future years. Everything the governor said about it is correct. But we have so few tools to work with without the Republican votes to extend these tax revenues that I'm afraid this may be the best we can do on a majority vote. So if the governor has a path to a better budget, I'm all for it. I will follow. I'm a little worried, though, that we're not going to have the Republican support to get us there.
Prop 25 was passed by the voters last year with the hope that we could end this budget gridlock. And in my view, the minority rule that Republicans exercised when a 2/3 vote was required. They're still quite obstructionist, the Republicans, and Prop 25 has a couple of factors here. One is that we're in uncharted territory because Prop 25 said that you had to pass a budget by June 15th or legislators and staff would stop getting paid. Well, you passed a budget, but the governor vetoed it. The proposition didn't allow for that, so now the controller, John Chung, I guess, has to make a judgment call about that. But the other aspect of this is that with the bare majority required to pass a budget, it puts Democrats in an awkward spot because you're the architects, it's your fingerprints on all of the brutal and ugly cuts to higher education, to services for seniors and the disabled, and the most vulnerable in our state. Yeah. So how do you square this? And since you're in your final term, can you give us a little wisdom of what you think we should do to, long-term fix this?
Yeah. Well, the long-term fix, starting with the last question, there's a couple things. If I could have my fondest wishes of reform in the state of California, I would do away with term limits so that we don't have a house full of legislators with little 2-year political horizons. It leads to bad decision-making and just very bad process. The second piece is to allow the legislature to have all the tools you need to govern on a majority vote basis. We now have a majority vote budget on which is a great improvement, but we still need 2/3 to raise revenues. And so that's problematic in a year like this where we're looking at a $9 billion deficit after we've already voted on $11 billion in cuts in March. So we really have taken it down to the point where if you want further cuts, and this is the question we pose to the Republicans, tell us where. Do you want to close some universities? Do you want to release some violent criminals? I mean, we have taken state government down to the point where those begin to be your choices if you want to bridge a $9 billion deficit. And that's where, I think as you point out, they are content to just let us solve the problem and then criticize us after we've made the tough decisions. So it's a difficult place to be.
Is their loyalty greater to Grover Norquist, the taxpayer or the low tax guru, than it is to the people of the state of California?
Undoubtedly, yes. Absolutely. Because they're not really governing. Most of my Republican colleagues didn't really go to Sacramento to solve problems and govern. They knew they were going to be in the minority, and they've sort of come to accept their role as critics, as doing political theater and not really being part of the tough decisions. It's really unfortunate, and I think it's a big reason why the Republican Party continues to dwindle every year in registration and relevance.
Which is a shame because as you have been in the legislature for the past 6 years, you've tried repetitively to get some things done. Most recently, well, last term, the oil tanker bill. And my understanding of it is if you spill oil in the bay and it's your tanker, you got to pay a fee for it. You get in trouble for screwing up.
Yep.
Of course, it was passed, and the governor vetoed it. Our last governor vetoed it.
Yeah.
Now I understand it's passed the Assembly. It's going to the Senate.
Narrowly passed the Assembly.
Narrowly.
A much, much harder fight than it should have been, and than it was last year. And it's interesting, and the fight over this bill, and just so your viewers know what's going on, California has two funds in terms of oil spill prevention and response. It has a trust fund that is based on a fee on the oil industry that sits there so that we're ready to go and respond in a cleanup mode. You need some money parked to take care of the costs of that. But we also have a separate response or prevention program that is funded by a different set of fees, one on imported oil and then one on vessels that come in and out of our ports. Every year they pay a few $1,000s called a non-tank vessel fee. Those two fees together fund all of the Department of Fish and Game's activities. Under the Department of Fish and Game is an agency called OSPR, Oil Spill Prevention and Response. They do everything in California to monitor, regulate, inspect, make sure we're ready to prevent and stop oil spills. That fund is about to go bankrupt. It has been heading towards deficit for the last couple of years. That's why I introduced this bill. It will be a few $1 million in deficit next year, much deeper the year after. Meanwhile, we're not doing nearly the level of inspections that we need to be prepared and to prevent oil spills.
So if you think about it, this fund is going to extinguish itself. There's not going to be a budget money for this fund. Right. So the money to do the cleanup is just not going to be there from the state. So what you're trying to do is get the money from the people who caused the mess to clean up the mess, and you're having difficulty even getting it through a Democratic Assembly?
Yeah, last year, of course, we were in the middle of the Gulf oil spill, and so the politics were such that Big Oil realized they weren't going to stop my bill from passing the legislature, so they just went around to the governor and got a veto, very quietly. This year, we've got some new legislators. The oil spill in the Gulf is beginning to fade in people's memories, and so they have taken me on much more directly, and that's why it was a very close vote coming out of the Assembly. And we've got our work cut out for us in the Senate. Shocking that 1 year after that tragedy in the Gulf, knowing that California is not prepared, knowing that we're running out of money to do what we have to do to prevent oil spills, that it's such a heavy lift to do this simple couple of penny increase per barrel in oil to fund that program.
Oh, I can hear him now. It's job killer.
Job
killer for polluters. Jared, you've also been leading the charge to use this phrase anyway, kill the death chamber and death row at San Quentin. Tell us a little bit about that and your views on the governor's plan to shift some of the state prison population to county jails. How will that impact Marin?
Two different issues. One good news, one I think good news, but with some question marks. So the death chamber or the death row is a huge victory. Frankly, it's something I've been fighting for almost every day that I've been in office for the last 5 years. A prison bureaucracy that was locked in on this project that over the next decade or so would have cost us nearly $2 billion. It would have been the most expensive prison space on earth, $500,000 per tiny cell. And it would have been out of space 3 years after it was built. All of this, of course, on a world-class piece of property where we can think of lots of better things to do, frankly, right on San Francisco Bay. And in my mind, I think of a world-class transit village right next to the prison on the spot that would have been this death row project. But that's probably a vision we should talk about on another show. In any event, we stopped it. We saved the state possibly as much as $2 billion in the middle of the worst fiscal crisis we've ever seen, so I feel very good about that. All the possibilities for that part of the San Quentin property are now preserved for the future, and it was a huge win. The other piece of it you asked about is what we call realignment. And what Governor Brown is trying to do as part of tackling this 5-year budget crisis is really shrink state government back to the stuff that the state has to do. And he believes, and I think he's right, that there are certain types of offenders, also juvenile offenders, that can just be much more cost effectively dealt with in county jail. And so that's really what the criminal justice realignment piece is about, identifying the low-risk folks, the juvenile offenders that we can send down to county jail. Got to send some money with it, though, because local government has its hands full, too. And so that's one of the tricks to making this work, is identifying that long-term funding to go with these new obligations for local government. But I think it's going to work, and I think Governor Brown is innovating and helping us right-size government and find cost-effective solutions.
You've announced that you're going to run for Congress if Congresswoman Lynn Woolsey announces her retirement this month, as we're all expecting, or some of us are expecting. What do you think of the new proposed district, and how does that affect your plans? And
well, first, Larry, don't steal my announcement. There's going to be big fanfare when the official announcement occurs, so I don't want anyone to think it's already happened.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding you. But I fully intend to run for this seat if Lynn retires as she expects. I haven't been coy about that, but we're not quite there yet. Lynn has to make that announcement. And then you're right, we're in the middle of this redistricting process. Every 10 years it happens, but it's very different this time around, because in the past, a handful of high-ranking politicians have simply gone into a room and drawn lines to protect their friends. And this time around, an independent commission is applying a set of objective rules to come up with maps. And it has a lot of people very nervous. And there's a couple of elements to this. First, there's the process, and I just want to say I like this process. I think this process is far superior to politicians picking their constituents and the kind of crazy gerrymandering we've seen in the past. I supported this. As far as I know, I'm one of the few statewide elected or state-level elected officials that did support it. But I just think,
especially Democrats. Most Democrats lined
opposed
up against it.
Yeah. And so, make no mistake, if we did not have this, with Lynn Woolsey's pending retirement, I guarantee you that the political establishment would have been divvying up the spoils of her district to keep all of the incumbents in the Bay Area safe. We would have been partitioned here in Marin County, no doubt about it. At least with this independent commission, we can make our case that Marin and Sonoma, I believe, are communities of interest that should be kept together. And now we've got a draft map that shows that we may not have gotten everything some of us wanted, but they're listening. Geographically, there's actually more of Sonoma County joined with Marin in their draft district than in Congresswoman Woolsey's current district. The thing that has some people puzzled and surprised is that the population center of Santa Rosa is drawn out of the district and given to a new inland Napa district that Mike Thompson would represent. We'll see if that sticks in the final map. But there is a rationale for having a coastal community of interest. The Commission heard lots of testimony about coastal communities really having a lot in common, and the environmental community wanted coastal communities to be kept together. There's also some history. Apparently Marin County used to be part of a Clem Miller district that looked very much like this. So
that's when Bill Bagley was a very young man. Now, yes. Jared, could you size up the competition? Norman Solomon, the author and activist, is running. Susan Adams, county supervisor, is interested, and there are others north of Marin County. How do you see this shaping up? And in particular, Solomon has experience on national and foreign policy issues. Yours is more focused at the state level.
Well, there will be a crowded field, Peter. This happens once every 20 years. So I expect I'll have plenty of company in this race if it happens. But I wouldn't trade places with anyone. I feel pretty good about what I bring to the table, including a record the last 5 years that shows a few things that I think we desperately need in Congress. First, I would reflect the values of this district. There's no doubt about that. I would bring a lot of passion to the work that I do. I've always done that. But probably most important is that I get things done. And I think people are tired of gridlock and dysfunction. When they look at Washington, D.C. right now, they see a lot of fighting. They don't see a lot of results. So I'm going to stand on a darn good record of delivering big results, getting things done, and doing it with the kind of values that the people of the North Bay want to see. And I'll let the other candidates speak for themselves.
Jared Huffman, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Greg Brockbank is in his final year of the first term that he's serving on the San Rafael City Council, and he recently announced that he's running to succeed Mayor Al Boro, who is retiring. Greg runs the Marin Law Center and served for 16 years on the College of Marin board. Greg, welcome back to Marin Voices and Views.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be here.
And why are you running for mayor? Give us your case.
Well, I feel like a public servant. As you point out, I was on the college board for 4 or 5 terms and ran for the city council 4 years ago. I love it. I began to think that should the mayor step down, I thought of this 3 years ago, shortly after I got elected. I would love to be mayor. I just about concluded that he was going to run again this year when he surprised me and perhaps others by announcing his resignation, his intent to step down at the end of the year a couple of weeks ago. So within a few days, I announced my candidacy for mayor. I feel pretty well qualified to do that, having served on the boards of several dozen organizations, including the College Board 3 times, and chairing perhaps a dozen. So I think I could be the spokesperson for the city. I think I am up to date on all the issues. In fact, I'm exactly where Boro was 20 years ago when he became mayor. He was about the same age I was. He'd served 16 years on the Planning Commission, 4 years on the council, and then he ran for mayor. I was 18 years on the College Board, 1 term on the council. Now I'm running for mayor.
And unlike some of the other communities, this is direct elect position, and it comes with a huge compensation package. You get a limo.
$7,000 a year instead of $5,000 a year for the rest of us.
Wow, that's a sacrifice. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you for even considering it.
Well, it must be popular because at least at this point you have one opponent, a former city council member, Gary Phillips, who's the chairman of the San Rafael Chamber of Commerce. How do you contrast your candidacy with his candidacy or compare your candidacy with him on various issues that are facing the city?
Although I did meet with him the day that Boro announced his intent to step down, it's a little early because neither of us have had a chance really to articulate our full vision, so I'd better not comment on his. I can tell you that I would like to move San Rafael more in the direction that we've been moving too slowly in the last 4 years. As I said when I ran 4 years ago, we need to green San Rafael, reduce its carbon footprint. We've been doing that. We commissioned and accepted a climate change action plan, the first in Marin. In fact, we're the first city in the state to be accepted into the prestigious Beacon Awards for reducing greenhouse gases. There are dozens of other examples of ways we've been trying to green the city, including trying to reduce traffic congestion and get people out of their cars and use mass transit and bicycles and their feet. And also, I really want to empower the neighborhoods. Frustration with city government comes when the neighborhoods don't feel involved, educated, informed, respected. And they were feeling very frustrated 4 years ago. I think they feel a little better now, and I want to continue that progress of meeting with them, working with them, giving them input, encouraging them to take courses like the Planning Academy, which I'm taking. So there are ways, small, which I can improve, I think, the operation of the city behind the mayor's gavel, from the way we treat each other and the way we treat the public, to the way the staff works and more efficiently, and because I'm proud of the fact that while we've had major cutbacks in the last couple of years, we have not had to reduce our core services or major programs. So the public has hardly noticed. We continue to get good ratings, in fact better than ever, despite our cutbacks. Don't know what Gary Phillips is going to do. He presumably will continue in much the same mold as Boro.
So Greg, one of the most contentious issues in the past year has been Target Corporation's proposal to build a store in East San Rafael. And on the council, after great deliberation, you ultimately voted against it. And as we're speaking here in the middle of June, local people have gathered signatures and presented them, and presumably if those signatures check out, it will qualify for a referendum, and you will be on the same ballot with a yes or no on Target. Do you consider this to be a settled issue, or will this be a focal point of your campaign?
Unlike most of the strong proponents and opponents, I'm not sure it's the most important issue facing San Rafael. Many people think it is. I have always had a visceral distaste for big box retail. It's not the ideal, it's not a sustainable business model. It doesn't contribute to the quality of life and the health and sustainability of a city the way locally owned businesses do, where say 50% of their money recirculates. In a chain store, maybe only 20% does. And big box retail like Target are known as category killers. They hurt everybody, all kinds of businesses. And so there's a lot of reasons, but the one which ultimately got me was jobs. It's hard to turn down the extra money for the city, but we shouldn't just be about money. Many people, maybe most, want the inexpensive goods that Target has to offer. But Target's been saying that the 200 new jobs, 85% of whom would be live within 2 miles of their store. Maybe that's true nationwide, and I thought it would be easy in San Rafael because the canal is 1 mile away, and I would love to have given a couple hundred new jobs to canal residents. But the community impact report we commissioned for more information said that over 90% of low-wage employees live outside the county. They're coming in, and that would be true of Target employees. So really, we'd only be providing a few dozen jobs at most for San Rafael residents, in exchange for which we'd be losing a few dozen better jobs, say at United Market and Safeway, just to name two, union grocers that pay 2 or 3 times as much per hour, much higher percentage of health benefits. These are people that have lived in the city for decades, maybe generations they've worked here, and they can afford to spend money here because they have a better wage. Target employees won't be able to spend money here because A, they don't live here, and B, half of their tiny paychecks are going to be going into their gas tank. And so this is sort of part of a race to the bottom, which I think is a problem. I understand your other guest tonight is Jared Huffman. He's done something really wonderful in introducing a bill called for benefit corporations, which some other states have done, I understand. So corporations don't have as their only bottom line profit. They're not only entitled, but they're mandated to make the maximum profits possible. And if they don't, they can get sued by their shareholders in a shareholder derivative suit. We need a different kind of corporations that can take into consideration things as well like environmental protection and social equity. So good for Jared for introducing that bill.
You know, your position on the target is consistent with progressive views that you've demonstrated over the years in public service at all the levels that you've been serving. The mayor, during this debate on target, criticized the folks who voted against the target issue as being ideologues. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, he didn't use the word ideologue, but I do think the mayor was clearly wrong. He said we were browbeaten, first of all, that's not true. There was a lot of pressure. There was like 1,000 some odd emails, there was 100 letters to the editor, there was a dozen op-eds, and we were just talked to everywhere we went for months and months and months. But he said it was the progressive wing of a political party. That's absolutely untrue. First of all, of the thousands of words which were written, the word Democrat was never used once. This is not a partisan issue, not a partisan issue, not a progressive issue. In fact, in the No on Target committee, it represents quite a wide diversity. I can name 3 right now, prominent business owners in this community. They're very active in their community, all Republicans, No on Target. So it's not a progressive Democrat thing. So the mayor was wrong on that.
Greg, on another issue, you've been kind enough to indulge me on previous visits to our show about the red light cameras at 3rd and Irwin. Now, to your credit, you voted against this program when it came up originally. And since then, the City of Los Angeles has decided to rip out all of their red light cameras. I say hooray. And Brad Breithaupt in the Independent Journal reported that more than 60% of the tickets issued in San Rafael, $500 tickets, are for incomplete stops. These are not people who rammed through a red light and said, I don't care. These are people who did a California stop.
A right turn.
Yeah. And I really think it's time for us to say this is a failed experiment. Are you prepared to lead that charge?
I would like to. Every time they come before us every 6 months or a year with their statistics, I think the police and most of my colleagues, frankly, and maybe way too many people in the city think, oh, this prevents accidents. This is a good thing. And there's something called a halo effect, which says in neighboring intersections, in fact, the whole city, people are less likely to run red lights. Well, that sounds tempting until you look at the statistics and realize that you can't measure before and after statistics at the intersection in question, 3rd and Irwin, because they admit that they lengthened the duration of yellow lights from 3 to 3.5 seconds, I think it was. So therefore, the before and after statistics are meaningless. So any reduction in accidents could just as easily and probably more properly be attributed to the lengthening of the yellow light duration than they could to the red light cameras. Mm-hmm. So I have not been convinced that it's a good thing or that that the red light cameras reduce accidents. On the other hand, I can't say it hasn't yet. I think it needs a little more time.
Greg, last month on our show, we had a fellow by the name of Mike Shapiro come in who's trying to work with a group to bring minor league baseball to San Rafael, to bring it over to Albert Park. Do you support that idea of having minor league baseball in the park, or how do you think that's going to impact the community?
We're trained by our city attorney not to take positions in advance because usually they come up on appeal from the Planning Commission, and if we take a position in advance, we disqualify ourselves. And plus, we haven't gotten all the information yet. Now, the Parks and Rec Commission tentatively said, this sounds like an okay idea, go ahead and apply. They didn't give it an approval. It will come to the council next month, July, by the time this show airs, presumably. The only sneak preview we had of the council's opinion, perhaps, was the recent decision we made on a proposed boxing match by Paul Nave. That was a little more controversial, actually, because it was boxing, not baseball. Some people have a not so high opinion of boxing compared to baseball. We did approve that 4-1 because, after all, we rent out Albert Park for special events. And he came and said, I'd like to hold my special event there. I did not see any compelling reason not to, despite the staff recommendation not to. Baseball seems more likely, if I had to guess. There's probably less objection, with the exception of a few very vocal, very nearby neighbors that are worried about sound and lights and parking and the effects of people roaming around the neighborhoods that may have had too much to drink. But baseball is played there all the time. This is just going to be larger crowds. But people think that, hey, let's get people in downtown Santa Fe, eat at our restaurants, make Santa Fe look good with a minor league baseball team. And I think, if I had to guess, I'd say the odds looks pretty good.
Greg, Albert Park was also in the news recently because a gang fight started there, and then it led to stabbing and murder in Gerstle Park. Do you think we need to take a new look at gang prevention, and are you satisfied that we have safeguards in place to keep our community protected from gangs?
There's no denying that there has been an increase in gang violence and even a few murders, although it's hard because the numbers are so small. Santa Fe has averaged for many years about 1 murder a year. You don't have any for a few years, and then you have a few in 6 months. You think, oh my God, there's a 6-fold increase in murders. Well, it's kind of, you can't really judge that on such small numbers. We are fortunate in Santa Fe and Marin generally to have far less of a gang problem than our neighbors to the north in Santa Rosa or East Bay or even San Francisco. But we do have a problem, and we're on it as best we can. We get briefed regularly, publicly and privately by our, well, I don't think privately, publicly, by our police chief, and we have gang specialists, and we work with the people in these other cities. And community policing is a big part of it, and I'm amazed with what they do. We have all sorts of people, not just police officers, but we have other professionals. I think it's the kind of thing which ebbs and flows. It's at a high point right now. I hope it'll go back down. It's ebbed and flowed before, kind of like graffiti.
Mm-hmm. Well, Greg, thank you very much for joining us. We wish you the best in your campaign for mayor, and perhaps we'll get you back on during the heat of the campaign as we get closer to Election Day this fall.
That would be terrific. Thank you both very much.
Thanks for coming by.